Hello and welcome back. In this issue, I want to talk about socialism, and I want to talk about what my freeze dryer when it comes to my attitude about socialism. I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking. Okay, let's get started. As a true blue dyed-in-the-wool Republican, a hardcore conservative, and a devoutly religious Christian, as well as an advocate for free market capitalism, I have always had a lot of arguments, a lot of things to say about socialism, things that just didn't make any sense to me. And I've talked with a lot of people about the concept of socialism, and I've always taken it from the point of view of not trying to consider what other people were saying to me, but what I knew to be true, or at least what I believed to be true about it. Well, not too long ago, I was freeze drying water. Uh, yeah, I was. It was water. It had to do with technical support and known values and all that other kind of stuff. But I was freeze drying a batch of water so that I could see what the log files were going to look like. And during that time, while I was thusly engaged in freeze drying that water, something happened, something I noticed about what I was doing that caused me to stop and reflect and think about socialism, no less. And I'll explain exactly what happened and exactly why. However, the first thing that I want to do is I want to tell you about my beliefs about socialism. Now, it's not my intent to say, "Oh, you're wrong," and "I'm right," or just you're being dumb and you're being thoughtless or anything. It's not. I want to state a few facts because after my episode with my freeze dryer, I had a great deal of time to think about the way I approached the subject of socialism and how I presented my argument about being anti-socialist and pro-capitalist. So I decided that I needed to study why socialism has failed, which is something I never did before, really to any depth. I always had facts and figures, and I always had experiences, and I could point to this, and I could point to that, and I could point to the other. But I never really did anything to sit down and think critically about why socialism always fails. And I come down and have discovered that socialism can work. It can work if you're able to control one critical variable. Okay, only one critical variable, and that critical variable is the one thing that has caused so much pain, so much death, so much destruction, and so much failure in a socialist society. Okay, and if you're watching me now with a critical mind and an open mind, let's discuss socialism and why I believe that it can't work, and why it is that we need to control the variable. Okay, so let's talk about Venezuela. I can tell you exactly why Venezuela failed in its socialist endeavors. It wasn't but 20 years ago or thereabouts that Venezuela was one of the most thriving economies. It had money coming out its ears, and it was a very successful nation. And so what happened? Why did it fail? Okay, now some people would say, well, it failed because it adopted socialism. But let's talk about why. Let's talk about exactly what happened, because it's really pretty simple about what happened to Venezuela. And that is that Venezuela was producing and exporting large amounts of oil. Okay, compared to per capita, they were exporting more oil than just about anybody else in the world. And no matter how much money they had, no matter how much prosperity they had, there was still social classes within Venezuela. There was still the mega rich, there was still the middle class, there were still the poor, there were still people that had their hands out that wanted more. And because they had so much oil and so much prosperity and everything, they also had a booming tourist trade. People were bringing money into the country and spending it, and it was a virtual paradise. My wife is Venezuelan. I've been married about 7 years now, and she tells me what it used to be like and what it was like when she finally left. And she was kind of forced to leave because of some unfortunate experiences that she had in her life. But what happened to this booming economy, everybody except for the social elite had somebody that they could look to that was doing better than they were. Okay, the poor could look to the middle class could look to the upper class, and the upper class was looking to the elite. And the elite, well, they didn't have anybody to look to, but they didn't care about it because, you know, they had enough money. They had enough money to survive, and no matter what happened. And so we had some rather entrepreneuring, I guess you could say, political leaders that jumped in there and convinced the people that socialism was the way to go because there was plenty of money, there was plenty of time, there was plenty of everything that they needed. And so Venezuela adopted a socialist society. All of a sudden, all the education was free, all the medical was free, everything was free, at least to some degree to everybody. They tried to make everybody equal in outcome without equal effort. And it worked fine for quite some time. And the reason it worked fine for quite some time is everybody in Venezuela thought, well, this is all free. Everything's free. Everything's free to the people. When the fact of the matter is, it wasn't free. It cost a lot of money. But it wasn't the Venezuelan people that were paying for it. It was the people in other nations, in other countries that were buying all that oil that had the positive cash flow into the country that was supporting all these programs. So you went to the doctor and nobody charged you, they charged the oil. You went for your education, nobody charged you, they charged the oil. Okay, all the other free stuff and social services and programs and everything, they didn't charge you, the Venezuelan person, they charged the oil. Well, what happened? Well, I can tell you in one short sentence, that was during the time when oil was over $100 a barrel. Okay, so all of a sudden the bottom drops out of the oil market, oil plunges to around $40 a barrel, and all of a sudden there's that inflow of money that was supporting the Venezuelan socialist lifestyle dried up. All of a sudden the demands for services was outpacing the inflow of money, and the rest is history. The socialist model failed. And it failed just like it did in Cuba. It fails like it did in Russia. It failed like it did in communist China. It fails like it did all throughout the world. And the reason that it failed was because the government was incapable of handling what ended up being the one critical variable, the foundation variable that they thought they could control. Okay. Now there's some facts about socialism that are immutable and that you will find are true at all times. When you implement a socialist society, number one, the government will always be okay. Okay. Number two, the government will have the guns. And number three, the people will have no power. Okay, they will have no way to defend themselves. And when the services dry up, because the money dries up, and it always dries up, there's only one way to make it viable, and that is if the government steps in and starts making demands. Okay, it starts forcing people to do things. That is the socialist way. Now, so what is the one variable? What is the one thing that's so hard to control that governments think that they can control by force? The variable, of course, is human nature. Okay? How do you control greed? Can you control greed at the point of a gun? How can you control laziness? Can you control laziness at the point of a gun? You can to a certain degree. You will either force people not to be lazy to work, or you will force people out of the country. My wife was forced out of the country. She left. She couldn't handle it anymore. She got tired. She was robbed one too many times and left to live with her family in North Carolina. I met her online, and we have been very, very happy ever since. But as I looked at it, and I kept thinking, there's got to be something that is driving the belief from so many people that socialism can work. You've got our youth, you've got politicians, and you've got our schools and universities, and that's trickling down even to our elementary And in some cases, I hear of socialist propaganda being fed into preschool, and that really gives me cause to pause and to think, what's going on? How can so many people believe what is so obviously a dangerous, dangerous path? Well, again, I'm going to get back to my freeze dryer and exactly what caused the light to go off when I was freeze drying. Now, I'll make a long story short. I bought a freeze dryer. I had it in my garage for a while. They said not to operate it in a hot environment, which I bought it in the fall, so I had several months of using it in my garage without having to worry about heat. But the first time there was a 100-degree temperature day, my freeze dryer failed because the refrigeration unit could not keep up with the heat, and my vacuum pump became hot as a pistol, and it stopped working, and everything kind of went to Hades. I quickly shut down the system. I had to throw the food away and clean out the system and wait for it to cool down. I brought it in the house. I put it in my darkroom, and it's been running fine ever since. But when I first put it in there, I called tech support, and because the machine was acting up, the heater wasn't working right or something, I ended up replacing a heater relay that had burned out. But during this time, the technician asked me, he says he wants me to do what is called a water batch. Okay, and the reason that he wanted me to freeze dry some trays of water was because water is a known value, and the freeze dryer's onboard computer will keep a log file of exactly what the temperatures are doing and all the different systems are doing, and he could analyze that log file and tell me what was going on and tell me what I needed to do to get my freeze dryer working again. But I remember I brought down a large pitcher, and it had, 8 or 10 cups of water in it or something. But I started pouring water into the first one, the second one, and as I got to the third one, I noticed that I had put too much in the first two, or at least more than I was going to be able to put in the third and the fourth, and I didn't care. So I put less in the third and even less in the fourth, and I shoved the trays in. I started the batch, and this time the batch worked fairly well. And I remember going in there after the batch was done. It only took 19 hours. But I went in there and opened up the freeze dryer and started pulling out the trays, and sure enough, the water was all gone out of all 4 trays. And for some reason, I thought to myself, yeah, that's socialism for you. There was something in every tray, and now it's all gone. Everybody's on an equal level of poverty. And as I was pulling the trays out and setting them down, then it happened. I noticed on the inside of the barrel, the freeze dryer barrel, the ice was still there. The ice was no longer in the trays, but it had sublimated off the trays and deposited onto the side of the barrel. And all of a sudden I started thinking, oh my goodness, the water's not gone. And here I'm thinking about socialism and how everything's just gone. The water wasn't gone. It was still in there. It was just in a different place. And I thought, if I defrost this and catch all the water in the bucket, which is a normal activity, I could redistribute that water into all 4 trays, so that each tray, although they started out with different levels of water in there, I could arrange to put all the water back so that all 4 trays had the same amount of water. And I thought, wow, there you go. There is the reason that young people, agree that socialism is the way to go. However, I sat back and I started thinking again, what's really going on here? What's really going on? Because we're talking about consumables. And my freeze dryer, the water in my freeze dryer, it may have changed hands and places and everything and then been put back in the trays, but eventually I'd have to come up with more water if I was going to take this scenario. I'd have to come up with some kind of a system for maintaining my freeze dryer socialist system, so to speak. And I would have to control human nature. Now, with my freeze dryer, human nature wasn't involved. It was mechanical. All right, so that was a variable that I didn't have to control to be able to put unequal amounts of water in each tray, have them sublimate off, defrost it into a bucket, and then put equal amounts of water into each tray, which is what people seem to think that socialism will do. They're always talking about that top 1% of people, the rich people, the people that apparently sit on their butt and don't do anything, but have tons and tons of money, billions and billions of dollars rolling in, and they're thinking to themselves, well, surely we have enough money for everybody. We have enough money for everybody to make the system work. But the problem always rolls in with the human variable, okay? Laziness and greed. In order for socialism to work, in order for everybody to have something for free, that something has to be produced, okay? And you can't just magically throw money at something and have it produce, because what happens eventually is the value of that money begins to devalue, because the strength of the nation begins to falter, businesses begin to falter, everybody wants to sit back and do nothing and receive something, okay? Because if you're going to eat, there has to be, the farmers have to work. People at grocery stores have to work. Everybody has to work. The medical industry is the same way. You say, oh, well, let's just have free medical for everybody. Doctors have to work. Nurses have to work. Medical supply people have to work. They have to come up with all of the buildings and the support structure and everything else. It has to work and it has to be paid for. And whether you like it or not, the money that comes from the top 1% of our country is not limitless. Those rich people, they don't sit back and just make money just because you don't see the risks that they take, you don't see what they do, you don't see the planning, you don't see the education, you don't see what a rich person has to do. All you see is rich people enjoying the fruits of their labors, and you want that too, and that's understandable. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of rich people that have ended up broke because they failed to keep the systems rolling. They failed to continue to, I don't want to use the word exploit, but yeah, I guess that's the word you could use, is they failed to exploit the free market capital system in a way that kept their businesses running, it kept people employed, that kept their cash flow going. And remember, their cash flow may represent a huge wheel of cash, okay? But that cash isn't coming from nowhere. That cash is just a huge wheel that they're able to tap into. It still has to go to the banks. It still has to get lended out. It still has to buy the support structure to keep itself turning and burning. And if its support structure fails, then all of a sudden that big wheel of cash that rich people seem to own, it disappears. And they go broke. It happens all the time. And some people last generations without it happening, but other people's, they will risk everything and fail. Okay? So anyhow, I'm sitting there thinking, and my mind is racing at 100 miles an hour. What can we do to support ourselves when the United States becomes Venezuelanized? And believe me, if we keep going the way that we're going, it is going to become Venezuelanized, because you cannot control greed and you cannot control laziness. You can't. And when you have greed and laziness, when those two things come together, you have social collapse. And I don't care if you call it capitalism, I don't care if you call it socialism, I don't care if you call it whatever. When greed and laziness become the predominant forces in a society, then it's going to collapse. And I hate to say this, but most young people, they're all for socialism because all they can see is the immediate results. If I was $40,000 to $100,000 in debt because I'm in school, and somebody come along and said, well, if we go socialism, they'll just pay all that off. You'll no longer be in debt. And you can stay in school. Shoot, you can become a professional student, do whatever you want. Take whatever courses you want. As long as you're in school, somebody else is going to be footing your bill. And all you can think about is, well, oh, perpetual school, and how fun is school right now? Okay, it doesn't seem to matter what people are studying anymore. It all has to do with how enjoyable the time at school is. So with our young people, they tend to rally around socialism. As a matter of fact, there's many of them that tend to lean towards schools that promote the same idea. And for me, that's why the radical left seems to be the ones that are gaining the positions of instructors and professors and everybody else that's teaching in these institutions, not because it's a good philosophy, but because it's attracting a whole generation of young people that want socialism to happen so that they can get out of debt. And then the school is setting themselves up to professionally entice young people into their schools and get further and further and further into debt so that they can pay the school. So the school benefits, the teachers benefit, they get to keep their jobs, the administrations and the investors, they all benefit because the students seem to be an endless supply of money. And then the government turns right around, and for some reason I just can't figure out for the life of me, they begin to guarantee loans for students that are studying things that are going to have absolutely no value when they graduate. Okay? Women's studies is going to have no value when that person graduates. It's not going to be able to help them pay off their loans. But they keep doing it. They keep doing it, and they keep doing it because that's what the students want. And that's what the students want to be taught. They want to be taught that the work ethic is secondary to the socialist ethic. And the socialist ethic, by its very term, means the equal distribution of the work and the debt. But the fact of the matter is, if laziness becomes predominant, then there's no work. And if there's no work, there's no prosperity. And if there's no prosperity, there's nobody to keep the socialist model moving. It happened in Venezuela. The socialist model worked for a long time until the bottom fell out of the oil market. And when that happened, the bottom fell out of the tourist trade. And Venezuela is now a third world country, a terrible place to be. And I have seen pictures and I have seen documentaries that show what happens when a country loses its economic foundation. And that's what happens all the time. But you know something? The government, they're not suffering. Venezuela is going to come to a crashing end. It's going to end up like Cuba. Cuba's about there. I don't know how much longer Cuba can last. But if you think for one second that this country, that the United States of America is any different, then you're wrong. Because you cannot control laziness and you cannot control greed. And this country, if you look around, has a great deal of laziness and greed. And if we adopt a socialist lifestyle, then I think we'll go down the tubes faster, much faster than Venezuela ever did. Okay. I do hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts with regard to socialism. I do invite discussion, and I will respond to mature adult conversations of point counterpoint. However, this is only part one, the reasons that I think maybe we shouldn't become a socialist society. But in part two, I discuss with you what we should do if we do become a socialistic society and how you can prepare. I talk about what I call a democratic socialist food storage program. And I'm also tinkering with the idea of starting a society that I call the Official Society of the Democratic Socialist Construct. Okay, and I'll tell you all about that. I'll tell you all about the certificate that comes with it, and I'll tell you how it is that you can survive in a socialistic environment. So with that, I'm hoping that you will subscribe. I'm hoping you'll hit the notification button and share this video. But most important to me as a professional photographer, and I mention this on every video, I hope you'll visit my gallery. The address is right there. I do a lot of neat stuff, especially with fireworks and water drop and high-speed photography. So go ahead and click on that link. There's a link in the header there that'll take you to my personal gallery. Go ahead and take a look around. Leave me a comment. Leave me a challenge. Tell me what you'd like to see me do, and I'll see if I can't do that for you. With that, I'm Evan Rowell, and this is Critical Thinking.